This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Jared Dillian. He's the editor of the Daily Dirtnap. It's a daily market newsletter for investment professionals. He has been updating it continuously, publishing continuously since 2008. His two books, All the Evil of This World and Street Freak. Jared gives that behind-the-scenes look at Wall Street that all of us that have some connection to the street really enjoy. Think Liar's Poker, updated and done in a different way for a more modern time. Perhaps that's not 100% accurate, but it gives you a flavor of where Jared goes, pulling back the curtain and looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly of Wall Street. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jared Dillian. Myrtle Beach, please tell me you are a Kenny Powers fan.
I watched the first season of Eastbound and Down. I couldn't really get into it. Actually, I thought the writing was better than the acting.
Yeah, I have to say, I've got an addiction for it. Season 3, they are in Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, and they filmed it at the minor league ballpark here, which I go to. I have like season tickets for.
Nice park?
It's very nice, yeah.
Yeah, I've always been a huge baseball fan, so it's been a long while since I've been to a minor league game, though. I think the last time was somewhere outside Baltimore. Let me give the setup to you, and I want to let you run with this. My start at trying to figure out Wall Street was the summer of 1994, a recently minted MBA with no clue of Wall Street, Florida State MBA, which, you know, no offense to Florida State, basically worthless on Wall Street. But I found two alumni that were on the street or just got off it. One was Jim Massey, who was famously featured in Liar's Poker, the head of the trainee group. The other was a guy, I can't recall his name, but he was in muni bonds, and I think he was helping the locality set everything up, but Lehman Brothers. And so I do recall having a lunch at Lehman Brothers, and this probably summer of 94, and I sat next to him. I don't recall talking to him, but it must have been right when Dick Fold had started. And so that was it wasn't an interview with Lehman. Going back, as a young guy, you read Liar's Poker and you're like, okay, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get rich. Liar's Poker just motivated me. Was your motivation something similar?
My motivation was more academic, I think. I was in the Coast Guard when I started getting interested in Wall Street. I was a hardcore saver. Saved a lot of my paycheck. I just got interested, what can I do other than having all this money sitting in the savings account? I went down to the local used bookstore and I got A Random Walk Down Wall Street by Burton Malkiel. I got a Jack Bogle book. I got like these, the books by these indexers. So what they said was that, trying to beat the market was a huge waste of time, and that all these traders that tried to do it were just, completely wasting their time. And it just didn't make any sense. Why would you have this whole industry with 200,000 people working on it if that was impossible? It just got me really intellectually curious, and I read more and more, and that was about the time I made the decision to go to business school. At this point, I didn't even really know I wanted to be a trader. That sort of came later.
You made it to the West Coast for your first job.
Yeah.
Walk me through that. You were taking a job as a clerk. I mean, look, that was the whole premise of Liar's Poker. Liar's Poker was like, be Lou Ranieri, get into the mailroom, get your way in the doors. And that's why I was going with my original question. Get your foot into the door in some way, because you clearly didn't just want to be a clerk.
Yeah, I mean, it was different. This was 16 years ago, right? So,
Liar's Poker before that.
It was 30 years ago, yeah. But Wall Street was different. Like, you could get an entry-level job in some capacity and work your way up because those entry-level jobs existed. Like now, because of technology, all the trading floor jobs are gone. A lot of the back office and middle office jobs are gone. I mean, really, like, it's unfortunate, but if you want to get a job on Wall Street nowadays, you have to go to like not even a top 10 school, but a top 5 school. There's no other way around it. But I started like you said, I started at the bottom. I basically just walked onto the floor one day, blundered into a job where I was just putting in trade tickets into micro hedge and printing out risk reports and getting lunch for people. And my job in my spare time was to learn about options. So I carried around, the Sheldon Natenberg book, Options Pricing and Volatility. I learned about options. I was going to Wall Street, applying to banks. I eventually got a job at Lehman Brothers. If that didn't work, my plan B was just to be a floor trader. That was my backup plan.
Let me dig into the biggest picture issue that I was thinking about in advance of our call. And I want to let you kind of do a little education here too. So we used to have 4 investment banks. I guess we don't have any now because Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley were reclassified to something else. But I would love for you to kind of give a little perspective on the 4 investment banks that did exist as of summer 2008. And what I'd also like to break apart, which is for me, something that it took me a little while to learn, when I think back to Liar's Poker, the whole idea of a trader on Wall Street was go work for one of these big investment banks. But then when you get inside and you kind of understand what it is, and I see this great quote from you, and I'm not sure if this was at Lehman or your first job, what I was in effect was one of the snails that cleaned the fish tank of the financial markets. I think we all grow up with this misunderstanding of what a trader is, or perhaps there's multiple definitions of trader. To me, the trader is the guy that, as you say, could be on the floor, like originally like a Rich Dennis, or most of the time off the floor making decisions. But working for the big iBank, that's an entirely different type of trading. And I think that gets lost on a lot of young people. It was surely lost on me.
Keep in mind that, as recently as 10 years ago, so you said we had 4 investment banks. It was Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Lehman Brothers, and Bear Stearns were the pure play investment banks. The investment banks, going back 100 years have been sort of the risk takers of the banking system, of the economy. Underwriting securities and making secondary markets is a risky business. This is the whole motivation behind Glass-Steagall, because the rationale was you didn't want, deposits at risk, with these institutions that were doing these inherently risky things. The culture within an investment bank is totally different than within, say, a Chase or a U.S. bank or a Wells Fargo or something like that. And that continues to this day. You go in these institutions and, if it had previously been an investment bank, it has a risk-taking culture.
You mean from Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs, you mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there was a lot of, basically everybody at Lehman Brothers where I worked, everybody was in effect a proprietary trader. Everybody had a mandate to look for ways to be entrepreneurial, to think of ways to make money. And that doesn't mean everybody traded $100 million of yen, whenever they felt like it, but everybody was in the business of making money if you were in a front office job.
Go back in time and outline for people perhaps the differences. For example, Morgan Stanley still exists. Goldman Sachs still exists. Your prior firm was not, they weren't saved. Bear wasn't saved. Talk about the 4 banks, for example. Give some historical perspective from your view, describing each one, perhaps the competitiveness, the culture of each, and perhaps why we're, for those that have forgot, why we are down to 2 major ones today.
Well, I can tell you about Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers, I think, was started in the late 1800s. They were formed by cotton traders down in Alabama. That was the genesis of the firm. It was a trading firm, first and foremost. It was a private partnership up until, I don't remember the exact date, but the sale to American Express I think it was in the 60s or 70s. And you can read about the whole history of Lehman. It's the Canaletta book. I can't remember the title of the book. Reading Glory on Wall Street. That's right. It was a private partnership, and most Wall Street firms were, which meant that you had 30, 40, 50 partners, owners of the firm who had their own capital at risk when doing deals. So if they had to commit, 20 or 50 or 100 million on a bond deal, it was really their own money. It was their own money. So they were very judicious about that. The private partnership structure is sort of what shaped that risk taking for decades. And it's not to say that everybody was careful all the time and investment banks didn't fail, but you didn't have this agency problem where, management wins and shareholders fail if something goes wrong. And that sort of changed going into the 80s. But, Lehman was a partnership. Then it was bought by American Express. And then when it was spun off in 1994, when you had that interview, Dick Fuld was the CEO, but it was spun off as a public company. And it was a very small company, and it grew massively over time. But it was a public company with shareholders.
For those that can recall, of course, Dick Fuld has a name today that not many people respect. Why don't you go ahead and give us something that we can think about where we might respect Dick Fuld, the good thing that he did, and then perhaps for those that have forgotten, kind of give some dialogue as to how things went sour at the end there. Because I've seen you make the comment that everyone thinks that because I worked at Lehman, I'm a bad guy. The reality is they had 20,000 employees and 19,996 were great and 4 were bad. So why don't you give some perspective there?
Dick Fuld was one of the most competitive people that you would ever meet, and also lucky. There was a quote about him that said, if you're ever standing behind him in line to get lottery tickets, you just better hand that son of a bitch your money because he's going to win. First of all, he was an athlete. Not a lot of people know this, but he was a very accomplished squash player. And I think he was the Maccabee Games squash champion for his age group. He played his whole life. And he had this nickname, everybody knows this, he had this nickname, he was the Gorilla. And he was just a very intense, intimidating, competitive guy. And his goal, when he became CEO in 1994, was to catch Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and become one of the largest preeminent investment banks in the world. And he almost got there. I mean, if you think about the growth of that firm, I want to say the market cap on the highs in 2006 was 65 billion or something like that, in my best guess. I mean, he turned it into a very large, very successful company. Really, there's so many statements about the financial crisis that I don't like. People say, well, nobody went to jail because of the financial crisis. I mean, after Lehman failed, you had about 800 investigators from 35 different agencies going over their books for weeks and months. Nobody was charged with anything. And being stupid still is not against the law, even if being stupid has incredible negative ramifications. And really, there was bad risk-taking, bad decision-making at the top of Lehman Brothers, but that was pretty much it.
That bad risk-taking, that bad decision-making, when did it start? It wasn't like it just showed its head in the summer of 2008. It must have, I assume, started somewhere after the Fed got rates down to 1% in 2003. It must, because that was the trigger. Or did the seeds of the destruction go back to the dot-com bubble?
No, it was probably 2003, 2004, because once the housing bubble started to lift off, Lehman was very highly leveraged to it because they probably had the biggest mortgage business on the street, mortgage underwriting and mortgage trading. And it was very successful. And honestly, when the dot-com crash happened in 2000, 2001, 2002, it was the mortgage business that was really keeping the firm afloat. It was incredibly profitable. Since it was succeeding, they just doubled down and doubled down and doubled down on it over and over again. And even when housing valuations got to stupid levels and, debt to disposable income got to stupid levels, they just fell into the trap that it was going to go up forever.
Was it as simple as, never as simple as this, but housing, real estate doesn't go down? And look, Bernanke was saying the same thing. Was that a large part of this?
Yeah, you have to keep in mind, there's a lot of armchair quarterbacking. We should have been able to see this. We should have been able to see this. Well, think about this. Like, up until that point in history, there had never been a national coordinated bear market in housing. Now, you would have local bear markets and local bull markets, but real estate was, by and large, a local phenomenon. So that's where, all the models were based on the concept that if New York was going down, LA would probably be going up and Chicago would probably be flat. Nobody had ever built into their models that the whole country's residential real estate market could go down at the same time, because it had just never happened before. But, what people weren't taking into account is that, these big macro factors, in particular, interest rates being lowered to 1%, were feeding into this model, and the whole thing could go in reverse.
Lehman goes down. You're out of a job. A lot of people are out of a job. And then all of a sudden, in that fall of '08, I can't remember the exact months, I'm assuming either October, November, of course, other iBanks start to get special treatment. Buffett sweeps in and certain things start to happen. And it's almost like, okay, the scrappy guys from the summer, Bear, Lehman, they're allowed to go to the wayside. But it was like the magical hand of God swept in, the hand of God, United States government swept in and made sure that the other guys did not go the same route, because it was clear as day their stock prices were going to zero too.
Basically, a lot of those decisions were made around systemic risk. Lehman failed. You probably remember the Reserve Primary Fund broke the buck, and the money markets seized up, and the Fed had to come in and backstop all the money market funds. Really, after that point, there was sort of an interest in the government in not letting another bank fail, because the measures they had to take after Lehman were so extreme. I mean, it's hard to remember, but this was 8 years ago. But in September of 2008, we were really staring down the barrel of the entire financial system coming apart.
The fear at that time, there's no doubt. I can't summon the feeling of the fear exactly anymore, but it was intense.
Yeah.
Let's go back in time, though. How did you you were out on the West Coast, clerk job, eventually moved to a trading brokerage type job at that firm?
Well, I was a clerk at a small market maker out in San Francisco, and then I went straight from there to Lehman Brothers. Well, I was doing school at the same time as I was clerking. I went to Lehman Brothers in 2001, and I started trading index arbitrage, and I did that for 3 years, and then I traded ETFs for 4 years after that.
What got you into Lehman?
I had an interesting story. Like your Florida State MBA, I had a University of San Francisco MBA, which I think was ranked like 170th in the country at the time. And certainly nobody recruited there. I was cold calling recruiters all over the streets, setting up informational interviews. And I had an interesting story because in addition to going to school and working on the floor part-time, I was still in the Coast Guard. I was still in the military, which was a full-time job. So I was, living this existence where I was working, 8 to 9 hours a day for the military, and then working part-time on the floor early in the morning, and then going to school. I mean, basically I was, 2 jobs in school at the same time. It was insane. I was sleeping like 2 or 3 hours a night. So I had this story of this really aggressive, hungry, scrappy guy that would do anything to make it to Wall Street. And that was exactly the kind of story that Lehman Brothers was looking for, and that's how I got hired.
How long did you go for 2 to 3 hours a night?
About a year and a half. Yeah, that was insane.
I'm 47. I don't really think even at 25, I had it in me that much to be with one organization to get that. Why did you have that? What was driving you?
Honestly, I'm not really to this day. I mean, I was by the time I got the job at Lehman,
2 to 3 hours a night is nuts.
Yeah, because I was coming home, from work at like 10 o'clock at night, and then I would study for a couple hours and then go to bed at 1, and then I would get up at 4. It was insane. I mean, that period of my life. I was young. I was in great shape. I was 25, 26. I could not do that now at age 42, obviously. So I had the energy to spare.
When you look back on it all now, though, because I haven't talked about this yet, I've not seen your first book. I've got your second book. But the sex, drugs, and rock and roll part of being on the floor, being a clerk, moving on to Lehman, when you look back on that now, because I didn't have the jobs that you've had, but I've probably seen a lot of the things that you've seen. And I'm not going to say I participated. Len Bias was enough to keep me from ever doing coke. How do you look back on it? Because in some ways, as I get older, I look back on it as a grand waste of time. But do you look back on any of the debauchery with fondness? Or how do you look at it today and talk about that environment? Because it really seems like to live that kind of environment, you've got to be a little bit bent.
So the new book, All the Evil of This World, is, has a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll in it. And it's a little bit of a period piece of Wall Street in the year 2000, around the Y2K period. I was on the floor at the time, and, I didn't participate in a great deal of this stuff either. But I knew what was going on around me, and I knew a lot of the personalities. I really look at it as, it's kind of like going to a museum and sort of looking at it behind like a glass wall. It's something that happened that will probably, that amount of excess will probably won't happen again. I mean, Wall Street is a very changed place after 2008. I mean, not only did it change, from the regulatory standpoint and from, trading and capital, but it changed culturally. It's very different now. There, the sexual harassment that I depicted in the book doesn't exist anymore. All that behavior doesn't really exist anymore. And I just kind of wanted to sort of like capture it in a bottle, so people can read about it, today or 5 years from now or 10 years from now.
Did they close Vegas strip clubs? Did I miss something? Talk about moving up the ladder at Lehman. Talk about stress. I'm really curious because here you're already going this 2 to 3 hours a night. This is nuts. This is really dedicated, to say the least. But once you started to get in the spirit of things and start to do well, which is right at the height of the real estate bubble, talk about the stress and how it was affecting you.
My job at the time, in 2006 was I was the head of ETF trading, and it's pretty amazing if you think about it. I was 31, 32 years old, which is pretty young. I would consider that to be young, and I had this position of great responsibility. And we were trading $1 billion a day in ETFs. My seat, that desk produced at the time about 60 or 70 million a year in revenue. It was a big deal, but it was also, that job was the highest. I'm not bashful in saying this. It was the highest stress job, perhaps, on Wall Street, being an ETF trader at that period of time. You were handling the biggest quantity of risk, highest dollar amount, highest volatility, and you were basically a punching bag for a bunch of very large, aggressive hedge funds. And it was pro versus pro, people trying to pick you off all day, run you over. And there were, pretty much most days, I would get myself so angry where I would be shaking maybe 2 or 3 times a day. And I lived like that for, the whole time I was at Lehman. I got gray hair. It was a massive amount of stress.
You make the good point when I talk about trading and trying to attribute the trading prowess not to the iBanks. I think you make the point that, hey, hold on, back Lehman Brothers, Bear, Goldman Sachs, they're in-house. We did have that ability to trade. I think maybe my comment is more about, I'd love for you to talk about this today. Because when I see some of the headlines in the last couple of years, there was the one great headline about how JP Morgan made money every day of one particular quarter. And I'm sure they probably make money every day of the year almost. To make money every quarter, to make money every day of a quarter, you're not trading. That's a gift. Because how do you make money every day from trading? That's not a level playing field for the guy that's out there looking inward to one of the iBanks and saying, oh, hey, I want to do that too. You don't have that access. You don't have that ability.
Well, when I was trading index arbitrage, I had 2 losing days in 3 years. And part of that was because of the nature of the trade. I was scalping, baskets of stock and futures, taking tiny amounts of risk and scalping small amounts of money at a time. So it was hard to lose money unless you were really careless. Banks are in the position of providing liquidity, and as liquidity providers, they're taking commissions, they're making spreads. It's actually a very unsexy business. They're not macro hedge funds. They're not investing in anything. It's just making markets. And when you make markets, your risk profile is I make a little, make a little, make a little, make a little, and maybe lose a lot if something bad happens. And that's how you get those P&L profiles where you might only have 1 or 2 losing days a year. That's how that happens. But working in a bank, it used to be perceived as like a very sexy job. It really isn't. It's not. You're just making markets, and it's you have to be fast, and you have to be aggressive, and you have to be smart. But the real investment decision making is being made by portfolio managers at, hedge funds and mutual funds and pension funds.
How many years were you at Lehman?
7 years.
So 7 years. Give me some color. I'm actually digging for something that I'm not even sure what I'm digging for, really. I don't have notes about this or anything, but I want to know some events, some people, some recollections, situations, experiences that in that period of time at Lehman changed you in a way that fundamentally changed you. Look, every day is not, it's a blur when you look back in time. I'm sure there were some key pivotal moments that just really influenced you in a way. Maybe you don't talk about these, maybe you do, but give me some of that color that you saw behind the scenes that just shaped you.
I can tell you a story. This is one of my favorite stories of just to tell you what Lehman Brothers was all about, like what the firm was like culturally. There was the guy who was running options trading in the U.S. at the time. He had a little bit of a temper, and there was a trade that went wrong. He threw his phone on the desk, and it bounced up and smashed into his computer monitor and broke it. So he had 4 monitors, and now one of them's broken, and it's not working. And so he only has 3 left. So everybody kind of saw this, and people are laughing a little bit. Within 20 seconds, a couple of IT guys run over with a new screen. They have these power drills. They're just like, they're guys in like a pit crew at NASCAR. They're like, zzz, they take out the old one, put in the new one, zzz, and he's up and running again. And then they run off. That really tells you a lot about what Lehman was like and what, banking was like 10 years ago. Like now, first of all, you wouldn't be an investment bank. You'd be at a big bank. So you'd have to like fill out all kinds of forms to get a new computer monitor, and you'd have to wait 3 weeks, and then you would get in trouble because you lost your temper, and like you would get talked to by HR and all this kind of stuff. Like back then, it was like, we need you to be making money. You're an idiot, but we're going to replace this, and we need to get you back up and running as soon as possible. And that was really the attitude. It was incredible.
I didn't work there, but I had a chance to tour it and see it. And I'm glad I had that experience before the building got destroyed on 9/11, which was to see Lehman Brothers trading floor. Why don't you talk about the notion of a trading floor at a big iBank? Because there were many, many instances where you could have side by side somebody making 5, 10, 20 million a year and somebody else making way, way less. I mean, it was a real interesting layout, these trading floors, because at a big macro hedge fund, it's not really set up like that. It's set up more like the Billions TV show. But why don't you talk about the trading floor and how you would have so many different characters and so many different earning potentials right there in the same stew?
Yeah, I had, for a while when I was at Lehman Brothers, they stuck the head of sales next to me. He was probably making about $7 million a year, and I was making, like 200,000. So, and
crazy, huh?
I mean, he was kind of a funny guy. We actually, we had some laughs, but basically there's just rows and rows and rows of desks with computers, and there really isn't, every once in a while they sort of try to rearrange where people sit on the floor to optimize, how people work, but it's actually like you said, it's really pretty random. You could be sitting next to an administrative person, or you could be sitting next to a middle office person, or you could be sitting next to the biggest producer on the floor. And if you just stood there in the middle of the floor and you looked around the floor, you would have no idea, who is who.
I'm curious your perspective. Young person starting out today. I mean, clearly a lot of the things that we're talking about, they don't exist anymore. The things that were talked about in Liar's Poker are long gone. And if you're going to get a job at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley, I mean, let's face it, the chances are about 0 for the average person. It's just not going to happen. I would think starting out today, the choices are very limited, and it's very meritocracy. Literally, if you want to trade, you have to have an approach, and you either trade your own money, get friends and family, or start a fund. But it seems like that's the way to go if someone really wants to do it today versus trying to spend all the time to try and get in with one of the banks, as you've outlined so far in this conversation, have completely changed.
Yeah, I got to tell you, there's really no easy path now. I mean, it may seem like, running a small amount of money is an easy path. Maybe if it's friends and family money, if you can scratch together 20 or 30 million, you can do it. But not everybody has those resources. Even starting a small hedge fund, it used to be easy 10 or 15 years ago. But now, with the regulatory requirements, I mean, you need 250 to 500 million just to sort of not be killing yourself out of the gate, just to sort of keep up with all the legal and admin requirements that you have to do. And yeah, working for a bank. I mean, when I was at Lehman Brothers, they hired 300 MBAs in 2000, the year I got hired, or 2001, sorry. I was talking to somebody at one of the big banks now, and they said they hired 8 undergrads for the whole bank. 8. Like it's gotten insanely hard. I was at Middlebury College for something else. I was talking to some of the finance students, and I ran into this young girl who was going to work at Goldman Sachs. She was incredibly poised at age 22. I was blown away. I didn't have anywhere near that maturity at age 22. These are the kinds of people, because the number of seats available are so small. These are the kinds of people that are getting hired for these jobs. It's so competitive.
You're an entrepreneur now, though.
Yep.
Compare and contrast that, because if she gets that job at Goldman Sachs, she's still working for someone. She's still at someone else's mercy. Talk about your transition to being an entrepreneur, a writer, and looking at Wall Street from the outside now.
Yeah, Goldman in particular, you really don't have a life when you work there. It's you pretty much give your life to the firm. It's pretty crazy. No, being an entrepreneur is much better. I didn't really realize how good it would be. Yeah, I started my newsletter, the Daily Dirtnap, back in 2008, right after the crisis. I got an office on 3rd Avenue, this teeny tiny office with no windows. I got a computer. I started cranking out these newsletters. It's pretty great just being in charge of my own destiny. If I succeed, it's because of me. If I fail, it's because of me. I don't really have anyone else to blame or take credit for. I can sleep in if I feel like it, or I can come in real early if I feel like it. I work hard, but I kind of do it on my own terms. What I always tell people when they leave a big corporate job and they go to work on their own, I say, you won't be able to go back. You won't be able to go back.
Give me your perspective on behavioral lessons that you picked up along the way. What are some of the things that you saw in the human condition being at Lehman Brothers, and even from afar? What are some of the things that you might pass along to the audience where they kind of go, that's a nice perspective?
From a trading standpoint, I mean, this is sort of what I specialize in, with my newsletter and my job. Like, I specialize in what people call behavioral finance. When I was at Lehman, this is kind of where I started doing this, when I was doing ETFs. I would analyze every trade that came in. So I would say, what kind of customer is this? Why are they selling? Why are they selling now? What size are they doing? And I would sort of pick apart their motivations. And it's funny because when you would sit there in the middle of the floor and all these trades would come in, you would see a pattern. If the market was tanking, everybody would be selling at once. And then I started to get the idea, maybe I should just take the other side of these trades and not hedge them, because everybody's doing the same thing at the same time and they're probably wrong. So it really got me thinking about market psychology, that experience, working on the ETF desk, making markets.
Who has influenced you beyond the obvious of like Daniel Kahneman in terms of your work?
I would say, Nassim Taleb has been a big influence from the beginning. I actually read his first book, Dynamic Hedging, which is a book about options, which came out in 1998. I was a big fan of dynamic hedging, and then he wrote Fooled by Randomness, and of course he's kind of blown up since then. But I was a Taleb fan from the beginning. He's been a big influence. Kirill Sokolov, who writes 13D Research, has been a big influence. He hasn't written any books in a while, but I've read all his old books from the 80s, and they're pretty incredible. It's a pretty short list of people.
There's a lot of garbage out there.
You said it. I wasn't going to say it.
There's so much out there. Listen, I mean, I write about trend following, and look, at least I can find track records that go back decades. I can kind of paint a picture there. But so much, for example, technical analysis. I mean, the vast majority of technical analysis books one should use for kindling.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no usefulness there, and this is going to apply to. I mean, how many books can you read about Warren Buffett that says you should buy and hold and be a value guy when Warren is doing these complicated strategies that involve having Goldman Sachs creating special derivatives for him? It's not the way the world works.
Yeah.
So going through your book, I've not heard. I'm not expecting you to do this, but man, you curse more than I curse in your book. I mean, I do these monologues and I drop F-bombs left and right. And sometimes I have to decide whether do I want to leave them in or beep them. Sometimes I get emails that people say, I like your stuff, but you cuss too much. We should forewarn people for those that have a weak constitution. They can't go into your work, can they?
The novel it's a novel. It's a story. And I'm portraying characters as they would have behaved back in Y2K. I don't swear very much at all in my personal or professional life. It just was sort of with the milieu of the book, like that's what was appropriate. But yeah, it is a.
Well, hold on, there must have been a lot of people in your world that were. You wouldn't just toss it in there if it was.
Oh no, yeah,
completely not accurate.
Yeah, that's what it was like back then for sure. But yeah, I mean, like you said, a disclaimer on the book would be, it's not for the faint of heart for sure. I mean, it's definitely NC-17 rated. But it is a fantastic book. I mean, I'm very proud of this book. This is, I think this really captures what life is like on Wall Street more than any other book that's ever been written, hands down.
Well, you should get with me and we should do the screenplay for the Turtle film that needs to be done, because you definitely have got a way with dialogue. That's for sure. I'm sure you look at guys like Aaron Sorkin and kind of go, yes. I'm sure there's some deep appreciation for what he does.
Yep.
Where is the best place to send everybody? The book, All the Evil of This World, out. The first book is out. They can find you. Everyone can find you at the Daily Dirtnap. The website is the Daily Dirtnap too, as well.
DailyDirtnap.com. Yep.
First book was Street Freak, right?
Yep.
I'm gonna have to grab it. I mean, you call this book that I have, you call this fiction. I'm reading it and I'm thinking, well, okay. I'm not saying you lived it, but somebody lived that book. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's modeled after people I've met, but it's pretty much made up. It's fictitious for sure.
Jared, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.